You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Ask a Gettysburg Guide number 8. We're up to number 8 already, Bob. Isn't that fascinating?
Wow, Matt.
I know. That's Bob Steenstra over there.
Hello, everybody.
Before we begin and get to our guest guide today, I'd like to just take a moment here for a couple of housekeeping things, little updates on stuff and whatever. First of all, I want to thank you all for the engagement on Instagram and Facebook, and mostly your just wonderful feedback on the show in general. I put a lot of thought and care into these productions. I really want to make it come alive for you and bring whatever I can of what's going on in Gettysburg to you. And so it does me a lot of good to get the overwhelmingly positive response from total strangers, which is rare and nice. And that kind of helps me overcome my impatience with how slow the production process can be, especially on the narrative episodes and things like that, because usually I give up when it takes too long. Also, I want to thank the National Park Service for letting me set up my recording equipment at the lectures, and the Rangers for their cooperation with me in the recording process. And if any of you guys get a chance out there, if you listen to them and you like that we're able to bring that to you, please drop the Park Service a line and thank them for letting me record and let them know how much you like it. They had mentioned in the last lecture that they don't have the budget to do the YouTube videos and stuff, and then that gave me an idea, and good. So I'm going to explore this idea.
I hope it includes asking them just to say, but Addressing Gettysburg, you can access this talk.
No. That's the short-term thing, but I'm talking for next year.
Oh, okay.
I think I might want to start a GoFundMe account. I got to find out how much it would cost to have someone hired for that. Okay. And then I want to see if I could raise the money amongst our listeners and other things like that, so that way they don't have to get it in their budget. But I don't know if that's allowed, or I don't know how that works. So I need to talk to somebody over there at the park. How about
this, the GoFundMe account, and then any extra money could be used to perhaps someday have a monument to some African American.
Well, that could be a separate GoFundMe account down the road. Once you build a case for it with solid evidence and all that other stuff, I think we could do that. All right. We can't just say, oh, let's have a statue for an African American. We got to say, well, who and why and what did he do and where does it go? So fill in the blanks, and I think people would get behind that for sure. So please, send the park a little thank you there if you get a chance. And then as always, as of now, those are possible because of our patrons over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. Got our 34th one this morning.
Wow.
34, Bob. That is 29 more than I expected.
Wow.
So that's pretty good.
So you have at least 34 friends.
No. Yeah, you know what though? Now we're getting into the point where I don't know the people's names. Like I've never heard. Yeah, I think once we got past 15, I started getting some strangers.
Great.
So that's nice.
Are you finished with your housekeeping things?
No. Okay. We've got a couple more things to go. Why? Am I holding you up?
I interrupted you anyway, so I'll just say congratulations on your housekeeping, because for the first time I came in this room and the trash was emptied.
I emptied
so many times I want to throw something away and I can't because it's overflowing. But good job, man.
Thank you. I'm in cleaning mode because I had that flood in my house.
Oh, we had to clean up that water.
Oh gosh, but it was great because I got everything, and I didn't have to mop the floors because the busted pipe did it for me.
Right. And who was your good friend who helped you?
That was you. Right away. You said, "Can I bring my shop vac over?" And I was like, "Yes, please do." But I had fans. And
that's why we're recording this Ask a Guide with Tim Smith. But what was it? About a week or half a week later?
It was a little bit about a week ago.
Of the flood.
Yeah, I had to cancel you guys that morning, and that was a nightmare. It was 4 days of a nightmare. But anyway, let's get through this because I got more things to go through before we get to the questions. Okay, so also meeting a lot of the listeners and a lot of the making some new listeners apparently from doing these lectures and everything like that. So that's another thing too. I always like that, meeting people, and so we've been doing that as well. Bob and I go to all of them. We haven't missed one, have we? Have you missed one?
I was taking my granddaughter to college.
Oh, that's right. And then
I got to listen to it coming home from Philadelphia that night.
Right, that's right. And then I missed two because of my back, but you were there recording them. Yeah. Okay. And did you know, Bob, that I've gradually been revamping the website, addressinggettysburg.com? Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Well, I have. And now it's easier to figure out how to listen to the show. You can check out our recommended reading page for great books on Gettysburg and the Civil War, including the books that we mentioned on this show. And on our Patreon feed, the authors who we interview, their books are up there as well. Tim's books are up there, I believe. We have a couple of them up there. Is it? How many do you have available on Amazon?
Wow. 5 or 6?
Okay, we've got a couple. I didn't know there were that many up there, so I'm going to have to add those.
Adams County Historical Society, where Tim works a lot, and you can also purchase, like I did last week, little pamphlets, little vignettes of the battle, including Mary Warren Fosnot.
Mary Warren Fosnot. Like a donut, like the donut.
Yeah, and this was a first-hand account of a woman who was at the Battle of Gettysburg, who was, according to her, actually hiding some African Americans on the 26th of June anyway.
Yes. Yep. And so much more. And
this was, Tim owns, I think if I read this right, the original copy
of this. I have an original copy. The Adams County Historical Society has an original copy of her account also.
But you donated it from your collection to the Adams County Historical Society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at some point, all my books Civil War books were donated to the Adams County Historical Society. Primarily all the rare Gettysburg booklets that I collected when I was a teenager in my early 20s. I used to hit the flea markets every weekend.
All right.
Yeah, I love going for the historian. They often have used books out there, and I always grab some pretty good ones. Okay, so let's see. So you can get we have a recommended reading list over there. There's going to be a lot more things on that website as well. But if you buy, if you click the links to these books, it goes straight to Amazon. If you happen to purchase the book or anything else after clicking that link, we get credit for it, and it doesn't cost you a cent more. So that's a good way for you to support the show without having to fork over money over what you were willing to spend anyway. So you were going to make a purchase. Well, there you go. We get credit, and it doesn't cost you anymore. So that's another way to support the show. And speaking, if I may, of Patreon, let me just say thank you to Colin, Owen, Jim, Kenneth, Eric, James, Justin, Chris, Peggy, Daniel, Joe, Thomas, and John, who all joined us in the last couple weeks.
Oh.
So I just wanted
to... Are those Patreon?
Those are Patreon patrons.
Well, Matt, I was one of the first, and you never said...
Yeah, well, I just started thanking people.
All right.
So
thank me now.
But thank you, Bob, for being the co-host and the patron. One of the first... You were, by the way. All right, and then finally, to any local business owners, I now have enough data to feel confident in offering additional advertising space on these shows. Advertising with us will give you a unique advantage over the traditional means of advertising. The first type of ads we're rolling out will be monthly uploads called This Month in Gettysburg. Listen, it's very simple. Our listeners want to come here, and they want to know where to eat, where to sleep, what to do while they're here. So... why not get involved with us and let them know so that they can get on board with you before they ever even come here? So help us help them by emailing me at matt@addressinggettysburg for information and to get started. Okay, so speaking of getting started, why don't we get started here with a question that I know Bob is going to love. Ricky Fowler, 63. He's intrigued. He says, have a good question for you on Ohio at Culp's Hill. And then he does the old bait and switch. He makes us think it's Ohio, but he really says an African-American combatant and his vanishing. So he just really didn't even ask a question there. He just threw out the information. But we were talking about this before the show, guys. By the way, and we already talked to him, but Tim Smith is our guest guide today.
Hello.
So, Tim, what do we know about an African-American joining the firing line on Culp's Hill?
Well, the first I had ever heard of this was in a book that was published by Ohioans at Gettysburg, or was about Ohioans at Gettysburg, called Buckeye Blood. And I believe, Bob, you have the quote there. Would you like to read the quote?
I do. This is not the quote, but this is going to appear in the Cincinnati Daily Times, July 14, 1863. Its source is a July 6th, 1863 letter written by a member of the 5th Ohio who was writing under the pseudonym Cozine. And this is what, there was a longer article than this, but part of it included these words, quote, On the left of our regiment, an American citizen of African descent had taken position, and with a gun and cartridge box, which he took from one of our dead men, was more than piling hot lead into the graybacks. His coolness and bravery was noticed and commented on by all who saw him. If the Negro regiments fight like he did, I don't wonder that the Rebs and Copperheads hate them so." End quote.
So to put in a little context, the 5th Ohio was part of Candy's brigade, Colonel, I believe, Charles Candy, and he was part of Geary's division, and that unit was involved in the action on the morning of July 3rd along what we call the Spangler Farm Lane. So not far from the Baltimore Turnpike, and so access to the rear of this unit would have been right off the Baltimore Turnpike. And the action he's referring to is, in the early morning of July 3rd, and probably the charge of Maryland Stewart's brigade across what we refer to as Pardee Field. And the 5th Ohio, which is the Cincinnati regiment, that's why he's writing to the Cincinnati newspaper, was involved in that action. And they have a monument there on, in Pardee Field. So, that's the account that was, it's not an account that we here at Gettysburg have known about for a while. It's an account that came into our notice when this book on Buckeye Blood was published. And, I think more and more there are accounts like that are from newspapers. And now with the access of, newspapers and newspaper search engines, you have access to a lot more articles about the battle that you didn't necessarily have even 20 years ago. So
right.
It's fascinating in that respect. But do you have any comments on it, Bob, before I weigh in?
Are you going off to another question? Because I have a few more things.
No, go ahead.
So this question has really intrigued me, and I've been thinking about who this could be. Matt and I have been talking, and earlier Tim and I were talking, and so last week I began doing just a little research, and I talked to Tim about some things, and an idea is knocking around in my head of writing a short story or a little historical fiction, giving possible suggestions of why a man might be there in such a case. But this is, I think, the only source we have of this. Is that right, Tim?
Yes.
So you take things with a grain of salt. Even the fact that this happened, maybe it did, probably it did, but maybe not. The 5th Ohio was... Well, Tim just kind of showed you where it was, but if you go to their monument and look at a boulder behind it, you'll see an owl. Can you talk about the owl and why that's there?
I don't know if we know why the owl was there, but the owl was the mascot of the 5th Ohio. Maybe it has something to do with the earlier movement during President Lincoln's campaign, the Wide Awakes, and I don't know, the owl is probably, it's the symbol. And of course it also, I think it says there's a little statement under the owl on the rock, isn't it? Or there
is. Wait a second. I took a picture of it when we were out there. Let me keep going. I'll find it.
The owl was the original monument to the 5th Ohio, and it was probably there prior to the regimental monument, I believe. And it's the rock that the owl is on is the Spangler Farm Lane. And so that probably more accurately shows the position of the regiment on the third day of the battle that we're discussing here.
I got it. It says, boys, keep the colors up.
Okay.
And then at the bottom it says badge, like we needed extra instruction. Like we don't know what that's a badge.
The badge of the 5th Ohio. Kind of like, the 7th Ohio, their badge or mascot is, the chicken or the
and that's on their monument too.
The fighting cock,
that's on their monument.
Yeah.
So there wouldn't have literally been a badge or some insignia on their uniform, would there?
I don't know.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Okay. Well, that fiction I'm writing might have one now.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so, the identity of the soldier referred to there is not known. But there were men in Gettysburg in our African American community that would be part of the United States Colored Troop, or in some cases the 54th Massachusetts.
Right.
At that time, and right after the battle, there were a bunch of men that enlisted in various United States colored units that were raised in Harrisburg. And we were talking about early, I don't know exactly who first suggested it, but people have suggested that it was Randolph Johnson who was the man who ran out there. And they suggest that primarily because his name appears in some records around the time of the battle. And I discovered in Harrisburg there are telegrams, incoming telegrams to the governor's office from Pennsylvania, from all the telegraphers in Pennsylvania. And David Wills sent a telegram to Governor Curtin on June 15th. And the telegram says, "There can be a company of about 60 colored volunteers obtained here. Will they be accepted?" And at 10 o'clock that night, Governor Curtin answered, "We have no authority to enlist colored men in this new service. Authority must first be obtained from the War Department." And of course, they're talking about the emergency troops. Mm-hmm. And so there's an allusion to this company of colored volunteers. Now, in William Frassinito's early photography at Gettysburg, there's another quote that sort of ties into the same thought. And basically, it's a letter written in Gettysburg on June 10th, 1863, a few days earlier. And it's by Henry J. Fahnestock. And it's written to Daniel Skelly, who was the brother of Jack Skelly, boyfriend of Jenny Wade. And this letter actually comes from the Skelly family. And when William Frassinito was researching his book, he talked to the Skelly family, and they showed him items relating to Skelly, and this is one of the items they showed him. But in the letter, it's quoted, "The colored company here under Captain Randolph Johnson has offered their services to Governor Andrew of Massachusetts, but he have understood since that they will not be allowed to leave the state, but will join a colored regiment or brigade to be formed in this state." And eventually, Randolph Johnson and a bunch of the citizens of Gettysburg actually do go to Harrisburg and join United States colored troops that are being raised there. So I think it's not that they weren't allowed to join the 54 or 55th Massachusetts. It's just that Pennsylvania realizes that they're going to raise troops also at that time, and maybe he's encouraged not to go. But I guess the point being here that we know that this Randolph Johnson and about 60 men are in Gettysburg. This is, June 10th when this is written, and that message by David Wills is June 15th. And, some of these men are probably in the area during the battle and not among those who fled. And perhaps one of these 60 men may have been the person who joined that unit on Culp Hill.
So it could be anybody.
Could be anybody.
Could be anybody.
And I should just mention that at the Adams County Historical Society, we do collect accounts and research on the men from our area that served in the USCT. We have special files. And I was just looking the other day, I think we have like 75 men from our area in our files. And then there's another research, a person that's done research, and they have like 120 local residents that have some connection with the USCTs. Now, when I say this, some of the people on this list are people that served in other areas, but after the Civil War, they moved to Gettysburg and died here.
Okay. So it's not natives of here.
Yeah. Or the other case, Lydia Hamilton Smith, who's Thaddeus Stevens' protege or
common law wife, maybe.
Partner.
Can we say that?
Depending on how you look at it. She had a couple sons that are born in Gettysburg.
Okay.
But they joined from Lancaster and they never returned to Gettysburg. So everyone who's connected with Adams County is mentioned in these lists, whether they lived here, moved here later and died and are buried in Lincoln Cemetery, or whether they happened to put on their their enlistment papers that they were from Adams County.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's see. Quinn 2477 would like to know if, other than the Irish Brigade, were there any other majority foreign-born regiments or brigades at Gettysburg? If not at Gettysburg, what were some of the more famous ones in both armies?
Wow. I didn't I like not to prepare ahead of time when I look at these lists. That's a fascinating question, or do these shows. But comes to my mind the Garibaldi Guard. And the Garibaldi Guard.
What were they?
Is made up at Gettysburg. I'm not sure exactly how many people they had left, but originally at the outbreak of the war, Garibaldi, the Italian, the
war hero, military hero,
unifier of Italy. Yeah. He was in New York City, and I think Abraham Lincoln, there's some talk, had asked if he would like to, be a commander of a unit or actually accept a generalship in the Northern Army. But the Garibaldi Guard are formed in New York City, but they're made up of not just Italians, but Hungarians and Austrians.
Yeah. Good day, Reb.
Confused with Austrians and some other men from Eastern Europe. And it is fascinating to look through the roster of the names. And then, of course, there are German units. That are the units that are just made up of German immigrants. I noticed, there's a book on Germans at the Battle of Gettysburg, and they in that book, I was kind of disappointed because they lump Pennsylvania Germans in with German Germans.
Right. Okay, can you get into, so there's Dutch and there's German, there's Pennsylvania German. Yeah. But what is the distinction between, because they all mean different things.
In my mind, there are German regiments that were formed with the Pennsylvania Germans or Pennsylvania Dutch, and these are people who were born in the United States, whose parents may be born in the United States, whose grandparents may be immigrated, or their great grandparents. So they are German
descent,
but they're not German.
But Germans. They're not. But they're not Dutch either, because Bob's Dutch. And he likes to point out that the Germans they're talking about are not Dutch.
Well, Dutch comes from the word Deutsch.
Yeah.
And the Pennsylvania citizens started calling them Pennsylvania Dutch. And I guess the Germans sort of went along with it. Okay, we're Pennsylvania Dutch. But, it's really Pennsylvania Deutsch. But, if you come into Pennsylvania today, a lot of stuff talks about the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Right.
So it's just a bastardization of the word Deutsch. But these, I kind of look at these as Pennsylvania citizens, and they kind of tend to get lumped in with the German Germans. Now, the German Germans are people that have immigrated in here from Germany, a lot of them after 1848, in the early 1850s and the late 1850s, and there are units that are made up primarily of Germans from cities like, the 74th. Pennsylvania, for instance, it says on their monument, the German Regiment. They're from Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and they have some people from Baltimore in their units. The Germans all mixed together. One unit that's really interesting is the 82nd Illinois, that's made up of a lot of Germans. Company C, the 82nd Illinois, is Jewish.
Really?
The colonel of the 82nd Illinois is Colonel Edward Solomon. And he is Jewish. Yep. He is the highest ranking Jewish officer in the army at Gettysburg. And Company I of the 82nd Illinois is Scandinavian. And they are from Sweden and Denmark and Norway. And some of this, today it's easy for us to figure some of this out because of Busey and Busey, that have just a few years ago printed a book on casualties, Union casualties at Gettysburg, a 3-volume set. And in it, where available, they put the place of birth of the wounded soldiers from their service records. And you can go to Company I, the 82nd Illinois, and you can see Norway and Sweden and Denmark, and you can see the names of the towns they're from. And I use that book a lot if I'm, drawing information out. Of course, we know that what we call General Oliver Otis Howard's German Corps is made up, about half the units are of foreign, origin. And there's Irish, of course, in the 61st Ohio. So they're Irishmen all. So they're kind of lumped together, and they're called the German Corps. But it's a vast variety of.
It's just got a lot of Germans. It's not totally German.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's fascinating to read about this. One of my favorite stories is always with the 82nd Illinois. There's a guy named Emil Fry in that unit. He's from Switzerland.
Okay.
And he's captured at the Battle of Gettysburg, spends time in Confederate prison. And after he's released, he goes back to Switzerland, becomes the president of the Swiss Council for many years. And so he's one of the, leaders of the Swiss government. And he's at the Battle of Gettysburg. And so we do have a large selection of other people. I off the top of my head, I'm sure that the 69th Pennsylvania that fought at the Angle is primarily Irish, and of course their flag has a decidedly one of their colors has decided Irish flair to it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of prejudice against the Germans and Irish at this time. And we talked about this before, that with the Germans, they don't seem to get much respect when
right.
people read about the Civil War, or people go back and research the Civil War, or in popular literature, not just us now, but popular literature written after the Civil War usually downplays the role of the Germans. But you could argue that the Irish made a name for themselves dying in the American Civil War. And I think there's one thing that I noticed too that seems to me it seems noticeable, is that if there is a battle and you're a general and you have an Irish regiment over here to your left, and on the right there's a regiment that is filled with people from a town, and their parents are all very important people in the town, or a newspaper reporter is one of the parents, or a judge, or their prominent families, you're going to send the Irish in. You don't want these guys killed and have to get some bad press.
Right.
Nobody cares if the Irish are killed.
Yeah.
But Abraham Lincoln had a policy where he offered citizenship to those who served in the military. And I had a relative, most of us do, from Baltimore, that joined the Army and gained citizenship. He was German because of his service.
Right. Yeah, well, and we do that today, don't we, still?
Sure.
Yeah.
Was his name Schmidt?
Yeah.
Was it anglicized? No.
No, this particular guy's name was Conrad Muhl.
Okay.
M-U-H-L.
Just another regiment that comes to mind real quick is the 40th New York, but we probably need to move on.
And where were they from?
Well, they're called the Mozart Regiment.
Yeah, they're New York City.
New York. But what was their nationality? Do you remember?
Mostly German.
Okay. Mozart makes sense.
Tell you what, we're running out of time. So someone write in that next ask.
All right. Grant Harvey 15 has an interesting one. He says, sorry, this question is a bit out there. Do we know of any officers who fought at Gettysburg whose father or grandfather fought during the Napoleonic Wars? I imagine there has to be some Prussians in the 11th Corps with a relative at Waterloo.
That's awesome. I love that question. Well, let me hit him with two things that I know about.
Okay.
Again, my expertise, maybe I know a little bit about the battle, but my expertise is the local citizens.
Right.
And there's two stories that I absolutely love. And one of them is when General Gordon's brigade is marching through New Oxford on June 27th. There's a citizen of the town. Let me think if I can get his name right. His name is something like Michael Jacob Gottfried Peffer.
Okay.
And he ran a medical school in New Oxford at the time of the Civil War, and he had sons in the Union Army. One of his sons was in the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment that the day before had been, driven off the field by the Southern Infantry. And then one of his sons is in the 87th Pennsylvania, which, was overrun at Winchester, Virginia. So these people, this guy is probably conscious of the fact that the Confederates marching through the town have, just fought against his sons, and he probably doesn't know if his sons survived those battles or not. They did survive, both of them survived those battles, but he probably doesn't know. So he's sitting in his front yard of his house in New Oxford, just glaring at the Southerners as they go by. And we have a photograph of him. One of the Southerners looks over at him. He's got a long, shaggy beard. And he says, "It's Jesus Christ." And he has a scar on his face, according to the account we have, his biography that he received as a Prussian at the Battle of Waterloo.
Interesting.
And then there's a guy named Michael Zellinger who lives at the edge of the town of Gettysburg at the time of the battle, and he's the one who picks up John Burns off the battlefield, puts him in a wagon, and brings him into town. And in his biography, it says he had a saber wound that he received at Waterloo. And then thirdly, in Abbottstown, also Gordon's brigade on June 27th, a little town east of here. According to the history of Abbottstown, we have two sources for this story. George Geordie is standing in the square of Gettysburg in front of his store. And everybody else,
Abbottstown?
I'm sorry, in Abbottstown. He's standing in front of his store in Abbottstown. And Gordon comes riding into the town, and all the civilians are hiding, but this guy's just standing there on the corner watching the Confederates march by. And according to the account, Gordon rides up and says something like, I'm paraphrasing, "Have you ever seen anything as magnificent in your life?" And Geordie looks at him and says, "When I was a kid, Napoleon's army marched through my town."
I'll do it.
Wow, that was a good question, Grant Harvey. That was, and I don't think I'm going to try to get my guide license now after this.
That was my school district where I taught. New Oxford, I taught, and Abbottstown was the eastern stretch. And so, just for the listeners, you go east of Gettysburg 10 miles, you're in New Oxford, Pennsylvania, and you go about another 4 or 5 miles east of that. This is all on New York Road. You get to Abbottstown.
Yeah.
And for the reader who, for the listener who asked the question, let me just throw in that. I don't remember exactly the story, but Gabriel Paul, who's a brigade commander and who's wounded through the eyes in the first day's battle, he's from St. Louis. And I think his grandfather served with Napoleon.
Wow.
You could,
that's pretty cool.
They could look that up online.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I am no longer going to try to get my guide license because I cannot fill my head with as much information as Tim does. That's pretty good for not preparing.
Well, I'm thinking of turning in my guide license and shame.
Right, exactly. All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with some more questions.
Think outside the bus and let Getty's Bike Tours show you the only way to truly experience Gettysburg. There's a reason why Getty's Bike Tours is the longest running bicycle tour company in Gettysburg, and that's because they put the customer's experience at the top of their list of priorities. Follow a licensed battlefield guide through some of the most legendary ground in American history. There's a tour route for everyone, from the newbie to the hardcore history buff. So go to gettysbike.com or call 717-752-7752 and book your reservation today. Mention addressing Gettysburg and receive 10% off your tour. That's gettysbike.com or 717-752-7752. Discount does not apply to rentals.
Life lessons from American history. Here's one you can use today for personal growth.
Gettysburg Lessons, with a valuable lesson from Thomas Kane. Get out of the way. Take yourself out of the lead position if you become a hindrance to the success of the team. To remain an asset and functional, get out of the way and allow others to tap into their own experiences and knowledge. Like Kane, assign authority to someone else if you do not want to lose involvement. Effective managing is directing others to do what you are unable to do. To lead is to trust individuals or teammates to use their talents for their benefit and yours. As a contemporary equivalent of Kane, the late automobile executive Lee Iacocca once remarked, "I hire people brighter than me, and then I get out of the way."
My favorite place to go, Mason-Dixon Distillery. They create their award-winning spirits from grain grown on Gettysburg National Military Park, and they cook their comfort food from ingredients sourced from local farms. For great food, amazing drinks, engaging conversation, and plenty of on-site parking, which is really hard to find here in Gettysburg, head over to Mason-Dixon Distillery, located at 331 East Water Street. Mention you heard this ad on Addressing Gettysburg and get half off any dessert with purchase of a meal. That's right, half off any dessert with the purchase of a meal just because you mentioned this show. That's Mason-Dixon Distillery, 331 East Water Street, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
What's up, guys? My name's John. I am the Tattooed Historian. And if you want friction-free history, edgy, new, exciting, you're going to want to check out my podcast, The Tattooed Historian Show, on iTunes or Spotify.
Victorian Photography Studio, located on Steinwar Avenue in historic downtown Gettysburg, is a vintage tintype and digital portrait studio. With hundreds of dresses and uniforms, as well as period-correct props and backgrounds, VPS can help you capture the perfect moment in time. As one of the few remaining practitioners of the craft, the photographers at VPS are trained in the history and artistry of wet plate collodion photography. So stop on in or book online for a truly unique Gettysburg experience. Go to VictorianPhotographyStudio.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram at VPS_Gettysburg. That's VictorianPhotographyStudio.com and at VPS_Gettysburg on social media.
Hey, this is Avery Lentz of Battles and Banter Podcast. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and other listening platforms. Give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Battles and Banter. If you like funny banter and good history, this is the podcast for you.
Are you a Civil War reenactor in need of a Corps badge, ID disc, or personal item to perfect your historical impression? Or are you a history buff who is in need of a small conversation piece? Shop with the Badge Maker at CivilWarCorpsBadges.com, where you will find unique insignias and more from the Civil War and 19th century. Display some handmade patriotism today and shop at CivilWarCorpsBadges.com. That's Corps, spelled C-O-R-P-S.
Dog tags in the Civil War, one of the most devastating Union defeats, took place in Florida. Confederate Lancers in New Mexico, a camel as a regimental mascot. Learn this and more on the Untold Civil War podcast, available on iTunes, Spotify, and Buzzsprout website.
Okay, and we are back. By the way, Eric on Patreon, he wants to let everybody know that you can actually take the RSS feed from Patreon and put it into your Apple Podcast app, so that you don't have to switch between two different apps to listen to the Patreon show and the free show. For those of you who don't have the Apple Podcast app, there might be another way to do this. I don't know exactly how to do it. He said something like go to the edit menu on the Apple app and then add show by URL, and then you paste the RSS feed in there. Where you find the RSS feed, I don't know. Where you find the menu to edit, I don't know either. And I have an Apple phone.
You know more than me. I thought RSS stood for Russians.
It does. Oh. The Russian feed. That's where you get the Russian bots and they come
Fake
in and
news.
yeah, there you go. That's exactly what it is, Bob. Everything is political with you. Everything is political with you.
No, it's not.
All right, here we go. Let's move on to the next question here. And this is sent to us by the Wooden Whale Company. By the way, if you love yourself some sperm whales, then you need to go to the Wooden Whale Co. On Instagram. They make whales out of what do you? They make whales out of wood.
You just got me laughing, man.
They make whales out of wood, and they're actually really nice. I want to buy one, but they're a little, I got to save up for that one. But they're really nice. Anyway, so he sends in a question here. He says, George Greene's resume, even without his brilliant defense of Culp's Hill, is stunning. Aside from knowledgeable history, guys like yourselves, why is there so little talk from him? So how come, or talk of him, why don't we know a lot about George Greene unless you're kind of in the know already? Why isn't he a big famous military history?
Well, I would just say for as far as Gettysburg, it's about the tour route. I've said this on the show before.
Yep.
That Culp's Hill is not really part of the main tour route of the battle. It's always been seems to have been relegated to sort of a sideshow. So, and the basic story is, we get people to come to Gettysburg. They're here for the afternoon. They go to the museum, maybe to see the movie. They used to watch the electric mat. Then they take a tour of the battlefield. And you go out through the town. You go out to the first day. You stop at the Peace Light. You go down. You stop at North Carolina. You drive down around Confederate Avenue. You go to Little Round Top, the wheat field, the peach orchard. You see the field of Pickett's Charge. And then, you have to go over, if you'd like, to the Tawnytown Road, Baltimore Pike, get on the Culp's Hill, and then you're supposed to come back and, see the high watermark. And, it is confusing because the tour route actually goes through the visitor center. And It's really unclear sometimes, to me, looking at the tour route signs, it's hard to get to Culp's Hill and come back. So I think most people just kind of skip Culp's Hill. And it's always been that way, that people skip Culp's Hill. So in our story the battle...
I thought at first, though, Culp's Hill was like where everybody wanted to go.
Prior to General George Sears Greene having his own monument.
Okay.
And then I got to say this with George Sears Greene. He died in 1899. And in 1906, they put up a monument to him on Culp's Hill, not far from the tower now. And when that monument was put up, the original road that led to top of Culp's Hill went up along the trench line, and then it veered out in front of Culp's Hill, and it went around near the 60th New York and out to 66 Ohio Monument, and then it came out, and boom, you were on Culp's Hill. And directly in front of you was a statue of George Sears Greene pointing at where the Confederates were attempting their breakthrough on July 2nd. And then what happened was, that road had some nasty hairpin turns on it. And they put that road in the 1890s. With that hairpin turn.
Are you talking at the base of the hill, like
as you're going up the hill,
where East Confederate is now?
No. I'm talking about, as Slocum, you come up Slocum Avenue along Greene's and Trench Line.
Oh, so it came up to the right of where it is now.
Where the 150th New York Monument, there's the 1st Maryland Eastern Shore Regiment Monument. The road used to bear to the right and go through the woods and around all the way to 66 Ohio.
So where the walking path is.
Yeah, and now there's a walking trail there. And then, when you came up on Culp's Hill, George Sears Greene's monument was the first thing you saw. And he was staring you in the face, and he was pointing down the side of the hill. Well, they ripped that road out in the 1930s. And the Park Service puts in a road that bends off to the left at the 150th New York 1st Eastern Maryland Shore Regiment. And then it goes around up to the top of the hill, and you park in a parking lot in front of General Greene's butt.
Right.
So,
right. That's where the tower is, for those of you who are trying to picture it.
The status that George Sears Greene once enjoyed, he doesn't enjoy anymore. You might ask yourself, well, why didn't they pick up the monument and just move it a little bit and put it closer to the tower, so it still would be...
Yeah, like when they deflate it for the winter, why don't they just put it somewhere else when they inflate it for the spring?
Why did they put it where they put it? Yeah.
Right.
So, that's interesting, but that has affected his reputation. And, of course, people who are interested in the 12th Corps as a whole will mention that, the 12th Corps and the 11th Corps were shifted away from the Army of the Potomac, and they were sent down, and they ended up being, at Chattanooga, and they ended up being the 20th Army Corps in Sherman's March to the Sea.
Right. Before the end of the year, right? They were moved.
And what happened was, and before General Meade wrote his official report of the battle. And so when General Meade wrote his official report of the battle, he didn't have access to the official reports of the top commanders of the 12th Army Corps. They didn't arrive, they said, until after he wrote his official report. So in General Meade's first official report of the battle, he doesn't really mention or talk about the actions of the 12th Corps because he doesn't have their accounts that he has everyone else. And some people say that because they're shifted away from the Army of the Potomac, their role in the battle has been diminished. And then, people suggest their roles diminished because they fought in the woods and no one could see their gallant defense. That, like in the fields of Pickett's Charge, you're standing there watching the Confederates coming, and you're looking to your right and left, and you can see all these troops around you and the things that happen. There, you're fighting in the woods, you look to your right and left, you see some trees.
Yeah. No, it's a more romantic landscape at Pickett's Charge.
The other thing, and, again, what I'm suggesting, there's many, many, many reasons, is that they're on top of the hill behind a stone wall. And we kind of romanticize charging across an open field. Yeah. And, and even at the time, people kind of downplayed the idea, well, they were behind a stone wall. And it's almost as if it was cowardly to be behind a stone wall. that real men come out from behind the entrenchments and fight in the open ground. Of course, they die, but they're braver.
Give me the Stonewall.
Is it true? Is it true that they had now? How does this go? The lower casualty rate on Culp's Hill, but the highest mortality rate. Is that correct?
Against the enemy?
No.
Oh, because
the 12th Corps
sustained that as a percentage, most of their casualties are taken by getting shot in the head because they're behind the entrenchments.
Because that's all that's exposed.
Because that's all that's exposed.
Yeah. Is that true? Or where did I forget where I heard that.
I don't doubt that, but I do not know those figures.
Okay.
So I understand the concept.
Yeah.
I understand what they're trying to suggest.
Because you've got the head rail, but then you've got the space, and your face is the only thing that's exposed.
Why I figured you were going to go, when you started that, that you were going to go with they have a lower casualty rate, but inflict a high casualty rate on the enemy.
Do they?
I don't know. I imagine that's true. It's comparatively.
I mean, it makes sense. It would, right?
Got to study
I'll have to go back and check fonts, but I just read recently in reading fonts on Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, that some of the casualties came as they were being replaced, like units back in action. They were hit actually in the lower extremities as they went over the little bit of a hump to gain the protection of that swale that's about 50, 60 yards
Where are you talking?
I'm talking about you take a unit from Greene's brigade, like the 149th Pennsylvania, which they might have been there the whole time though, or the 137th New York.
Okay.
It's going to be like changing lines in a hockey match, where there'd be regiments from Candy's brigade or whatever that would be in this little swale, maybe where the old Baltimore Pike used to run when it was before it was in the position it's in now, right? And so you would be back there, you'd be getting some food, you'd be cleaning your guns, you'd be getting ammunition coming off the Baltimore Pike. But then when the unit that was occupying the breastworks just to the east of you were needing a break or running out of ammunition, there would be a transition. So the frontline guys who are going back to get some R&R or whatever you want to call
expose
it,
their whole
exposed
bodies
for just a short period of time as they go over that little hump.
Okay.
And so I think it was in fonts. Maybe it was a footnote or something I've read recently. I have to go back and check that.
That's interesting. That does happen. I mean, and I know that on being on tours with Charlie Fennell, he makes a point out of that, and he says that he read several accounts where units. They're told to all follow volley, and then they run back, and the other unit comes running in at that moment. They fire a volley to try to get the enemy to put their heads down for a moment so that they can get the units replaced. And it is a constant. You can't stay on the firing along for hours and hours and hours. You have to pull units out, put units in, pull units out, put units in.
And they were on the morning of the 3rd. On the night of the 2nd, Greene was there. He was getting some help from the 11th Corps, like the 82nd Illinois you were talking about before, but the 6th Wisconsin and the 14th Brooklyn. But on the morning of the 3rd, that's almost 7 hours almost of
just continuous fighting
there. A little bit more about Greene.
Quickly,
here.
I got 3 more questions. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just say this. I was going to say a little bit more, but he graduated second of his class in 1823. He was born in 1801, and Tim just told us a little bit ago. I'm amazed because I'm looking at Boatner here. You had this in your memory. He died in 1899, and that makes him, at one point before he died, the longest lived graduate of the United States Military Academy at his point.
Wow. He was born in 1801. He died in 1899. He did not want any part of any other century.
Yeah, that's good. And his son was the executive officer of the Monitor.
That's what I like.
Oh.
That's awesome.
Interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. Culp's Hill is an interesting part of the battlefield I'm getting more and more into. And so when you come out here and visit, you got to make sure that you go over to Culp's Hill. A lot of cool things to see there. The hiking historian is back from the peaks of Mount Washington, and she asks, what role did the 104th New York play in the battle?
Cool. The Wadsworth Guards.
The Wadsworth Guards, yep.
Yeah. So they're in Robinson's division. John Cleveland Robinson, that's the 1st Army Corps. And off the top of my head, they're in Gabriel Paul's brigade, who we mentioned Gabriel Paul a few minutes ago. And they were one of the units that were originally stationed in front of the Lutheran Theological Seminary building. And then they were shifted over to the area of Oak Ridge, not far from the Peace Light, as Rhodes Division arrived in that late afternoon action. And first it was Baxter's brigade that was sent over, Henry Baxter of Robinson's division, and the Gabriel Paul's brigade. And so they were involved in that struggle out there along that ridge. Mm-hmm. And they fell back across Seminary Ridge to when Robinson's division retreated, and I think it's that unit that their flag was actually captured not far from the seminary. I think it's interesting today. We stand out there and we're thinking, if you're retreating, retreat towards the town of Gettysburg. And they don't. They retreat back across the ridge from whence they came instead of retreating through the town. And then when they get over near the seminary, the seminary has fallen, and Pender's division is wrapping around our seminary. And I think the 1st South Carolina Infantry of Perrin's brigade captures the flag of the 104th New York. So that gives you an idea how things are confused.
So they're up kind of near where the observation tower is today.
We call it the half tower, but it's the half tower. Yeah.
And they retreat down towards it, which makes sense because they came up that way, right? And so they go down that way, but then they're kind of like a pinball. Then they get pushed down there, and then they get bounced back by Perrin.
Is that Colonel Gilbert Pray's regiment?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, you're good. Their monument is next to the 13th Mass?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh-huh. So were they facing north, kind of refused for a while?
Yes.
Against O'Neill?
Yeah, no, they didn't arrive until after the initial action.
Okay.
So they pretty much fought against Ramsier. When Ramsier hit
that time.
A little bit later. Yeah.
And then
a lot of their losses are caused not in the action, but as they're being driven back across the ridge and during the retreat all the way through the town, and it's pretty chaotic.
Now, where did you said the 1st South Carolina, which meant, and I guess I wasn't listening carefully enough, I would have, if I'm them, taken the railroad cut and gone into the town of Gettysburg.
Yeah, so the 1st South Carolina Infantry came around the seminary building and were south of the Lutheran Theological Seminary building, and then probably headed across the fields to the Chambersburg Pike. We don't know where the flag was captured, but I do remember in a letter by, I think it might be by Perrin, he mentions later, it's written a little bit later, but he mentions they captured the flag of the Wadsworth Guards, and that's why it brings this up. There was a time in my life where I was going to write a in-depth biography the first days fighting, and I just never did. But I still retain a lot of First Corps minutia.
That sounds like it'd be good.
The other thing, of course, the Colonel Gilbert Pray, he has a quote on the Wayside exhibit downtown in front of the Hotel Gettysburg, and it's a quote that he gives from New York at Gettysburg when they describe the regiment. I guess he gives a speech when they dedicate the monument, perhaps. And he says that they got through the town only by the skin of their teeth. And that quote's used a lot. And the name of the Wayside exhibit's By the Skin of Our Teeth. And
where is this Wayside?
If you stand in front of the Hotel Gettysburg, it's on the right where there's a ramp, I think, that comes down.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So you might check that out if you're in town.
All right, and you were going to say something else?
No, I just think a lot of these First Corps units, you'll notice if you look at the casualties for the 104th, they suffer a huge amount of captured men as they're retreating through the town.
We were noticing that when we were on Culp's Hill the other day, and we were looking at the casualties of the 14th Brooklyn.
Yeah,
they have a lot.
They 99 men captured off the top of my head.
Off the top of your head, you're correct.
On the boulder.
Okay, so let's go on here.
Your head must be pretty big to have that much on the top of it.
Yeah, I know. Your neck must be killing you. Okay, Gettysburger RN is showing his depth of knowledge with this gem. What was the role of Tilton's brigade on the Stony Hill and their second position in Trussell Woods? Thanks.
Well, Tilton's brigade is part of General Barnes's division.
Right.
James Barnes. And, there's a couple really good books written by, men in these units. The 118th Pennsylvania has a particularly nice regimental history. And also, I point out the regimental history of the 22nd Massachusetts is really nice. I think it's published in like 1883. And in that regimental history, there's a drawing. And the drawing is of the position they held during the battle. So we know where their monument is today. It's as you ride around the wheat field. What would the avenue be called there? De Trobriand Avenue?
Well, it might be called Sickles by that time.
I know. It's all Sickles.
But you just go by the Irish Brigade monument, and then?
And just go around a couple turns and it's off to your left. I like the 22nd Massachusetts monument because it has... what's his name? Massasoit? Is that how you pronounce it?
I believe so.
And that's the leader of the Native American group that the Pilgrims met and had. Since we're at that time where it's the 400th anniversary of the
Plymouth Rock.
Did you guys hear Plymouth Rock was vandalized?
Yes, I saw that.
It was shocking.
I saw that. It was shocking.
Yes.
So
couldn't see that coming.
Yeah. So that monument is kind of near the center of their regiment, and there's a drawing in the front piece of the history of the 22nd Massachusetts. And if you happen to look at that book, it's really nice. Maybe you can Google it on the internet and find the front piece. It's a drawing that was done, and it shows that they're in the edge of the woods and looking across the rocks of the Stony Hill out towards the Rose Farm. And it's really interesting. So that brigade, Tilton's brigade, was placed in that position when the 5th Corps arrived. Now, James Barnes had 3 brigades, and one of his brigades was taken from him and sent to Little Round Top, Colonel Strong's Vincent's brigade. I always think it's interesting that Barnes was a classmate of Robert E. Lee. And Barnes is actually wounded during the battle. I think he's wounded in the leg.
Now, Barnes was the commander of
the 1st Division of the 5th Corps.
But beforehand, he was the commander of the 1st Brigade, which was Tilton, right? So Tilton went up from the 22nd Mass.
That's right.
He was the senior colonel.
Yeah.
Okay. So Barnes goes up because Sykes becomes Corps commander because Meade becomes Army commander? Is that how that worked?
Somewhere around there. Yeah, I don't know the time.
It was just a few days ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And I think that because the wheat field is so confusing, and because there's so many units that are in the wheat field, and the fighting is very confusing to read about, that the role of the individual people involved in the fighting there sometimes gets looked over. But they were on the Stony Hill, Tilton's brigade, and then they were pulled back or driven off of the hill when Kershaw attacked. So it depends on your perspective, or what time in the battle you put them in. Now, the other brigade in Barnes' division, Schweitzer's brigade, is then towards the end of the fight in the wheat field thrown back in once again, and they're really just overrun in the last stages of the fight. But Tilton's brigade stayed back along the Wheatfield Road, and some of the men in that unit, the 118th, actually assisted in holding the Mississippians back for a time that eventually overran Bigelow's battery. I think it's interesting that the 118th Pennsylvania, that their monument is on Big Round Top, that they have a marker. Right. Well, actually, I guess they have they have 3.
They have 3, yeah.
They have one on the Stony Hill where they fought, and then they have a small marker where I was talking about they're positioned at, I think what we refer to as maybe the Trossel Woodlot, where they faced off against Bigelow, and then they have...
Oh, they're the Corn Exchange?
Yeah,
the Corn Exchange.
And they have a really nice monument on the slopes of Big Round Top, which I always recommend going to see. That's really nice.
How high up is it?
You have to start maybe in the valley, at the intersection of Warren Avenue and Sykes Avenue, not far from the 20th Main Monument, and walking through the woods and up the side of the hill. There's no modern path to it, but was along the old Veterans Trail that led to the summit of Big Round Top. It's a really nice monument, out of the way, and it's really pristine. But, Tilton's brigade suffered heavy casualties in their action, and
19%.
They're really I guess in in Gettysburg parlance, maybe that's not heavy casualties.
It's heavy. It's 121 men out of 655. It was a small brigade.
If they had been thrown back into the battle, as Schweitzer's brigade was, they probably would have suffered a lot more.
Yeah, Schweitzer started with 1423. He lost 427, so he lost 30%.
Yeah. So, but they were involved in that early fighting in the wheat field and replaced the 3rd Corps units that had been pulled out at that time. But there's some good books on this subject. There's lots of there's a microhistory of the wheat field, and of course Fonts, The Second Day, is a really good book to read on this subject.
Okay, and finally here, Demas Lewis, he asks if Pipe Creek was as strong a defensive position if Reynolds okay, let me see here. Was Pipe Creek as strong a defensive position if Reynolds had not committed to fight at Gettysburg? What? Would Lee have attacked there or moved around that line? I think it would have been a 2nd Antietam or 3rd Manassas, and Meade may have lost, so maybe Reynolds and Buford saved him. I'm not sure exactly.
Well, I think what this question gets to is something that it's more of a modern take on the battle, and the proponent of this modern take is Gelzo. And so and it was a park ranger that did a program on Reynolds that tried to push this also. And one of the concepts that this question obviously stems from, maybe, I don't know what
Lewis is saying.
I don't know what the listener had read about this, but they, let's say Gelzo, for instance, what he suggests, and of course his book is all about Meade being a coward, which I just think is ridiculous, but he suggests that Meade doesn't want to fight at Gettysburg, and that Reynolds forces his hand by moving to Gettysburg and bringing on the battle that General Meade did not want to fight, because of course he's a coward and he's a Democrat and he wants the South to win the war, and he gets some all his crazy conspiracy ideas. But and I don't necessarily look at it like that, and I think most people, I think most of the Gettysburg historians, if you poll them, wouldn't look at it like that. So as General Meade took command of the army on the morning of June 28th, he tried to come up with a plan. And as he moved his troops northward over the next couple days, he came up with this idea that they could move on a broad front, and that if they met the enemy, they could all fall back to a prearranged defensive position along Big Pipe Creek. And I'll have you know that, I grew up along Big Pipe Creek. I'm originally from Baltimore, but when we were 12, we moved up into a position. I lived off in Carroll County off of a place called Stone Road, and we lived on a hill in the woods, and in front of our house was a field, and then it was Big Pipe Creek.
Oh, wow.
So I grew up imagining the Confederates crossing the creek and charging up the hill I lived on.
What's the closest town?
Union Mills.
Union Mills, okay.
Yeah.
And did you feel impregnable?
Yes.
And your commute would have been so much closer.
So I think in a general sense, as General Meade is moving his army forward, has his scouts out, and they're anticipating where the battle might be fought, and they find this really strong range of hills from Manchester, Maryland on the right flank of the army out towards Emmitsburg on the left flank of the army, and Big Pipe Creek flows through this area. And so, Meade is working on this, and of course he's not really married to this plan as much as people would like to believe. And then he does.
It's a contingency plan, isn't it?
And then he has the Big Pipe Creek circular that he issues on the morning of July 1st, and then this kind of.
And he issues that before he knows what's going on.
That's correct. Now, in the same in the same time frame that he issues the Pipe Creek circular, he's also. Through his staff officers having discussions with General Reynolds' headquarters. And Coddington, if you read Edwin Coddington's take on all this, now, granted, I read that before I knew much about this. So my general knowledge, base of knowledge on this subject is coming from reading Coddington and then reading more about it on my own as, I became an actual historian. I read Coddington way before I was a historian.
Yeah, I read it when I was 7.
Yeah, so, I was young.
Yeah.
So, I think that sometimes these modern writers they haven't read Coddington. That's a believe a period there. They haven't read Coddington.
Right.
And they don't understand the depth of research he did on this very subject. But Coddington presents it something like this, and based on the sources we have, that they have this plan, and Meade's been working on it, and the plan basically is for Reynolds to move forward to Gettysburg, and then meet the enemy, and then the army will fall back into this prearranged defensive position, and it'll draw.
So in other words, Reynolds is going to slow the enemy and draw them in as the rest of the army is kind of
concentrating and fortifying
the Pipe Creek line.
And of course we have the idea of would Lee have attacked the Pipe Creek line? I don't know about that.
I don't think he would have.
Yeah, so that's another issue. Of course, we don't think.
Because that's actually me and Lewis getting that conversation. He thinks Lee would have followed him down, and I go, no, he wouldn't. He would have kept doing whatever he's doing, or maybe he would have gone back into the valley.
But if it was the day before Pickett's charge and we told you the situation, would you think Lee would charge across the open field and attack the stone wall?
Well, that's
into cannon fire.
That's a good point.
No, but so anyway, they're in this midst of this conversation about this, and again, Reynolds and Meade are not talking. They're sending staff officers back and forth, and so Reynolds finally says to Meade on the evening of June 30th through staff officer, "Allow me some latitude. I'll go to Gettysburg. I'll check out the situation, and then we'll decide what to do." And then Reynolds rides to Gettysburg. Is killed. And we know just before he dies, he sends a message back to Meade and says, "Hey, bring the whole army up." Mm-hmm. So there's strong evidence that Meade was prepared for Reynolds to say, "Hey, scrap that plan. Let's move the army to Gettysburg." Right. The problem becomes obviously that the Pipe Creek Circular sent out, and like Slocum at Two Taverns doesn't know that when he hears the firing up there that he should advance because he just got the Pipe Creek Circular, and he's not supposed to advance according to that. So
doesn't Sickles use that some kind of excuse too?
Yeah. I think people have used the Pipe Creek Circular to attack General Meade and his character over the years.
Yeah,
and so that that's unfortunate. And trying to understand the situation that was happening at that moment. It's really difficult for us, knowing what we know, to put ourselves in the moment and try to think about things that are happening in that moment. So I have an opinion that Meade and Reynolds are best of friends, and that it's Reynolds that comes riding into Meade's camp after Meade takes command, and it's Reynolds that suggests that, hey, put me in charge of wing of the army. And in past situations in Civil War battles where you had someone named commander of the army, and all the subordinates are all upset because they thought they should have been chosen as the commander, and they're working against the commander. In Reynolds' situation, and Meade, you have Reynolds wanting to work with Meade.
Sure.
And
like he explicitly tells him, "I'm your man.
Yeah.
I got your back."
Hey. And then so when Reynolds, and I think Meade has Reynolds back. So Reynolds goes to Gettysburg, decides that, hey, the situation is now, it looks like they're concentrating on this road hub. We need to bring the troops up here. And he does. And then Meade responds, and the battle's fought at Gettysburg. But this idea that, again, I think some of the idea stems from the anti-Meade rhetoric.
Yeah.
That he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to fight at Gettysburg. I think one telling incident in Gelso's book when he discusses this is he says that Meade was calling for a retreat to Pipe Creek. And at that moment, when he says that, Meade's in Frederick, and Pipe Creek is north of him. Mm-hmm. And yet he's calling for a retreat to Pipe Creek. And I'm like, retreat? So in other words,
the bulk of the army isn't beyond Pipe Creek yet. They're still south of Pipe Creek.
So I think his plan develops. And I think also, since Meade just took command, it seems like there's an onus to have a plan.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know. But, just a little bit of background on the question the guy asked.
Yeah, okay. That's good. Bob, you got anything?
No, that was good. I just don't understand Third Manassas there. I don't
because there were two Manassases.
I understand, but why would we end up there?
No. He means a battle like second, but like yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
But I think that we don't know what ifs. What ifs are really, really hard to imagine. But what if there would have been a battle along Pipe Creek? I mean, I think there's an interview with Eisenhower at some point where he's discussing, it might be in one of the early Civil War Times Illustrated, if you have the ability to look in those. And in early 60s, they interviewed Eisenhower, and he said that he toured the Big Pipe Creek line. He was like, wow, that's a strong position.
So, okay, but it's moot. It didn't happen. The Battle of Gettysburg happened instead.
That's right.
So what's the point? Who cares?
What is the point?
Yeah.
Well, Tim could have just gone out his front door and been a guide there. It wouldn't be the Adams
that
County
would have been a lot easier
Society.
for you.
It would be the Carroll County Historical Society you'd be working for.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Tim, what lecture do you have this Sunday night at the Farnsworth House?
So this Sunday night, I'm doing something called 3 Views of Gettysburg, and I am going to analyze civilian accounts that were published in the 1920s and 30s by 3 civilians that lived here during the battle.
So 3 people who viewed the battle.
Yep. Daniel Skelly, who is Jack Skelly's little brother. And, Jack Skelly being Jenny Wade's boyfriend, he wrote in 1932 a really nice synopsis of his experiences during the battle. And then Mary Warren Fashnot, who lived quite a life, and Mary Warren lived on Middle Street, and she married a guy who graduated from the Lutheran Seminary, and she's living in New York later in life and writes reminiscence of it. And then Nellie Achenbaugh, who lived in the northern area of town around Carlisle Street, and her daughter wrote a reminiscence based on the mother's stories. So we have these books, and what I like to do is I explain what they describe in their accounts, and then I fill in more information around them. Like, for instance, Daniel Skelly says he's standing in front of the courthouse on Baltimore Street, and General Howard comes riding up, and General Howard gets off his horse and tries to gain entrance to the courthouse. And apparently the courthouse door is locked, and he's trying to get access to the courthouse cupola so he can observe some of the fighting on July 1st. And Dan Skelly worked at the Stock store, and he ran over and told General Howard, hey, I can get you on the roof of this building. And so he took him up to the top of the building and describes the situation up there. And then I compare Dan Skelly's accounts with staff officers of General Howard and General Howard's personal account, things that Skelly would not have access to, and discuss it. Things like that.
So that's going to be good. We're going to record that. The Tim Smith lectures that we record go on the Patreon feed, but they're for free. It's just basically a matter of storage space for me. So the free feed that you're listening to this on right now, I'm limited into how much space I can use each month, and so they don't do that over at Patreon. They just take a portion of my earnings. So I can put whatever I want there. So that's where Tim's lectures are. So they're free.
The lectures are at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
They're 6 p.m. this week on Sunday night. In March, I might push them back to 7 p.m.
Well, while you still have them at 6, I recommend anybody who wants to go, get there at 4 because you have the dinner crowd, and if you want to get a good seat, you want to get there kind of before people do.
Our capacity is limited there, and a lot of people do come and make and eat and
then they camp out and so I think
our capacity, we had 65 people at the Jenny Wade lecture, and that's about our capacity.
That was a popular one. That was good. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Bob. Do you have anything you want to add? What?
Folks, coming soon. Tim's going to come back, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Jenny Wade.
Oh, yeah.
Jenny Wade. I'm so excited.
And
new information
will be all sorts of brand new information.
This is newer information, newer than the information that he has in the new information lecture that I just posted on Patreon. This is brand spanking new. This will be
information you've never heard before.
Right. And also, we're going to do one about Lincoln's 25 hours here at Gettysburg as well. But that'll be for Patreon. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we'll talk to you next time. Keep those questions coming in. If you want to take a tour with Bob or Tim or any of the guides that you hear here on Addressing Gettysburg, just send me an email and I'll put you in touch. Matt@addressinggettysburg.com. You can also send questions there or private message on any of the social media, and I will add it to the list, and it will get into the rotation, and we will get to them as soon as we possibly can. Thank you all. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Tim, and have a good one, everybody.